So when you have a child espousing a quote-unquote conspiracy theory that involves discrimination, the teachers are actually encouraged to report those children to the authorities, okay? This is a very, very dangerous trend. This is along the lines of what we saw in the Soviet Union, where if a child comes in and says, well, you know what? I don't like communism. I don't agree with the official ideology. My parents taught me something different at home. Then that teacher is then instructed to consider reporting that child to the proper authorities for investigation. Obviously, this will be a record that follows them around for the rest of their lives. Extremely troubling. And imagine the chilling effect that will have on children, that will have on families.
I'm Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and this is the Miles Franklin Special of the Week for September 6th through 13th, 2022. This week we have something a little different. Coins remarkable not for an exceedingly low premium, but remarkable for being some of the most stunning, sought-after, and rarely available coins minted today. The Mexican Libertad series. Produced in highly limited quantities by the oldest mint in the Americas, the Libertad comes in 1/10, 1/4, 1/2, 1, 2, and 5 ounce sizes. Because of low mintages and consequent rarity of these coins, they do carry a higher premium than even American Eagles, but we have them at what we believe are the lowest premiums available from any dealer, so that you can secure these coins at the best prices on the market. And finally, we continue to have silver Philharmonics, Krugerrand, Britannia, and Kangaroos at only $4.75 over spot. Call us at 1-800-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-800-815-4237 to lock an order. We're happy to help you even after hours and on weekends. I'm Kaiser Johnson, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We're always glad to have this distinguished returning guest. Author and editor Alex Newman is a contributor also at Epoch Times, as well as a founding member of the New American, the Liberty Sentinel. He's here with us again on Liberty and Finance. Alex, thanks for joining us this Tuesday, September 6, 2022.
Great to be with you again. Thank you so much, Dunnigan.
I forgot to mention you're also one of the coordinators of the Red Pill Expo that we got one coming up. We're going to ask you about that later. But wanted to talk to you about the big picture today, about grave concern about how do we stay aware and prepared when we can't even be aware if the major media platforms are compromised and are basically just mouthpieces for government interference in censorship and deplatforming and silencing freedom of speech around important, vital topics over the last few years, which have caused everything from potential election result changes to potential health changes for people that are, and now affecting indoctrination of our children, to actually separating children and their allegiances from their parents to alliance with the state. It's grave matter, and it's something that we need to know what to do about as parents and as individuals who are trying to pull ourselves out of this sleepwalking that so many of us have been subjected to, and actually make healthy and vital choices for our families. So that's the big picture. You've participated in several aspects of that. Public school exit is one of the resources that you provide for people who want to get their kids safer. But let's talk about the problem first, and then we'll talk about the solution. So you've written recently and fairly extensively on this challenge that we're facing with being basically inundated with filtered, one might effectively say censored sources of information, many of which are continuously now being proven false information, misleading information, even though that's the stated aim of the censorship in the first place, is to protect the public from misinformation, and yet by doing so, misinformation is being programmatically spread by governments through major media agencies. Can you talk to us about what your research has shown you about this and how extensive the problem is? We'll start there.
Yeah, well, this is now ubiquitous. All of the major platforms, all of the major big technology companies, very much including the search engines, by the way, have now at the very least rigged their algorithms in an effort to promote information that the government and the international organizations like UN agencies want promoted. A lot of this now has come out through Freedom of Information Act requests, through litigation. In fact, we now have emails that have emerged with the CDC coordinating with the social media companies and even with Google about what information they want placed higher up in the search results, what information they want buried. In fact, just today, or excuse me, a couple of days ago at WorldNet Daily, they had an article called "Lawsuit Uncovers Army of Feds Censoring Speech in America." At least 11 federal agencies had bureaucrats working with the big tech companies deciding what was misinformation, what was disinformation, what needed to be silenced. We had the CEO of a major video platform provider telling people that openly, if the information that you're providing contradicts what the World Health Organization is putting out, then it's going to be removed. I mean, just saying that openly on CNN. And of course, now many of the things that the World Health Organization said have been proven conclusively incorrect. And everybody acknowledges this now, including the WHO, like the idea that the virus couldn't spread from person to person. For a long time, it was censored as misinformation, the idea that the virus may have been created in a laboratory. All of the U.S. intelligence agencies have now concluded that that's at least a possibility. It was widely censored and dismissed and fact-checked as misinformation, the idea that the injection did not protect against transmission and infection. At this point, every federal agency, including the CDC, acknowledges the fact that if you took the injection, you can still get it and still spread it. So what we're seeing is a total war on information. And just today, I had a major article published at the Epoch Times about UNESCO now declaring war on conspiracy theories and what they call misinformation. So the reason this is so important, Dunnigan, is because, as Biden's speech made very clear the other day, there's a war going on in America. Biden essentially labeled half of the country or more as fascists who are a threat to the nation, who are a threat to the soul of America. And so he was basically declaring war on a huge percentage of the population. And that percentage of the population tends to be more conservative, tends to be more religious, tends to be more interested in alternative narratives. And so when you think about it in that context, and we're not talking about a shooting war here, maybe a cold war or even a spiritual war is a better way to describe it. Any military officer will tell you that without decent intelligence, you are guaranteed to lose the war. If you don't know what's happening, where it's happening, when it's happening, what the enemy is doing, you're done for. And so with this manipulation, with this escalating censorship, with the FBI going to the social media platforms and telling them to watch out for Russian disinformation and then having that used as the pretext to silence all the news about Hunter Biden's laptop, as just one example among many, we have a situation now where the people who want to preserve the United States, the people who want to preserve the family unit, Christian civilization, individual liberty, the U.S. Constitution, are now having to search in new and unprecedented ways to find accurate, reliable information. It's very, very dangerous. And of course, this is by design.
Now, one of the most serious things you mentioned in there, besides the fact that this is ubiquitous, it's everywhere we turn. Even if you try to do a search about a topic of concern or of interest, the search results which you are presented with are heavily skewed towards a certain narrative rather than objective positions on this, so you can form a well-informed opinion. But you also mentioned a new twist on that, a couple of them. One of them, if we take first, and that's the global nature. You mentioned UNESCO. Help people understand what that is and why it's not like a branch of the U.S. government, and because that's been baffling people for some time. When sitting President Trump in office got his Twitter account suspended, and people thought, wait a minute, who is it that has the authority in our world to silence the President of the United States? That mystery never really got explained. But this goes beyond that, because this is something that's even bigger, the supranational.
Yeah, this is really significant, and I hope people understand this. This is not just the U.S. government. In fact, this is a story I've been covering since at least 2015, 2016, where the UN has been openly declaring war on ideologies that it says cause violence. Of course, it's not looking at, say, communism, right, which communist governments have murdered about 100 million of their own people. When they talk about ideologies that lead to violence, they're not looking at communism. They're not looking at the sort of autocratic rule that so many of its member states practice, North Korea, Cuba, Zimbabwe, I mean, take your pick. These are actually violent ideologies, and yet many of the UN's member states live and die by these violent ideologies. What they're talking about is people who are communicating, grassroots conservatives in America, for example, sharing information. That's what they've been going after. The UN Security Council set up a framework, they call it, for tackling extremism. And obviously extremism is in the eye of the beholder, right? A normal American who values the U.S. Constitution would say the Communist Party of China is pretty extreme. They have murdered tens of millions of people. They have brutally repressed Christians and Muslims. They're operating giant concentration camps and re-education camps. A normal person would look at that and say, yeah, that's pretty extreme. But of course, the Communist Chinese government has a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. So we know that's not the kind of violent extremist ideology that they're going after. So this is very problematic. And now UNESCO has doubled down in 2020 in partnership with the European Commission, which is basically the legislative and executive branch of the European Union. They have a pseudo parliament that kind of rubber stamps the laws that are coming out of the European Commission, but it's really not a legislative body in the true sense of the term. So the European Commission, in partnership with UNESCO, the UN Education Agency, in 2020 launched a Think Before You Share campaign. And Twitter was, of course, a part of this. They've brought in many of the big tech companies, including Microsoft has partnered with the UN on this. And it was an effort to stop the spread of what they consider to be problematic information on COVID, on elections, on whatever sensitive topic du jour we were talking about. Now they have doubled down on that. That's what my article that appeared in the Epoch Times today was about. They are launching a full-blown war on what they call conspiracy theories. And they've got a lot of documents to go with this. I encourage people to go read the article because it becomes very clear. And I interviewed many experts around the world, people who are experts in propaganda, who are experts in media studies, university professors, academics, people who do this kind of work for a living. And what they said is UNESCO here appears to be basically trying to shut down all discussion on topics that they don't want discussed. And it's very interesting to give you some examples of this. They say conspiracy theories are dangerous because they may cause people to have less desire to reduce their carbon footprint, right? That's interesting. So now we got to censor information that may cause people not to want to reduce their carbon footprint. Okay, you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to not want to reduce your carbon footprint, right? Maybe you just enjoy a high standard of living. You just enjoy steaks. You just need a big truck to drive your children around in because you got a lot of children. Right? There's all kinds of reasons why you may not be concerned about your carbon footprint. But that's the kind of thing they say that they're going after. And they say they're going to tackle it in the schools. They're going to tackle it online, on social media. And I'll finish this segment with this, Dunnigan. The UN actually has a agency, a specialized agency that they are grooming to become the global regulator of the internet. It's called the International Telecommunications Union. I've focused on this agency for many years. I've done many articles about this. And interestingly, or maybe frighteningly, the guy who runs this UN agency, his name is Haolin Chao. He is a member of the Communist Party of China. And he was asked early on when he was appointed to this post, he was asked by a South Korean journalist, like, hey, you're from China. You're with the Communist Party of China. You guys you like to censor stuff. And, what about the rest of us in the world who maybe don't think the internet ought to be controlled and censored? Of course, the Chinese government operates the most sophisticated online censorship system that the world has ever seen. Maybe now in addition to Google's. But they say that the Haolin Chao said, we all have a different definition of censorship. Censorship's kind of in the eye of the beholder. So, don't worry your little head about it. We'll take care of it. So this is very troubling when the UN agency that's supposed to oversee the internet is run by a member of the party that has not only slaughtered 100 million people of its own people, but has also built what they call the Great Firewall of China to prevent 1.4 billion Chinese people from accessing information that the government doesn't want them to have, whether that be on the Tiananmen Square massacre, or whether that be on the independence movements, whether that be on Islam or Christianity or whatever. It's extremely problematic, but I think it gives you some real insight into the United Nations and into their view of free speech. They've said many times that it's a human rights violation, this idea of free speech that we have in America, where you can say whatever you want. Under the First Amendment, they view that as a human rights violation. So it's very Soviet-esque, and I think it ought to concern people who value free speech all over the world.
So that's the global and globalist problem that's rearing its head and really behind a lot of what we're seeing in terms of the censorship that's being propagated down through these platforms. What about the other aspect of it where it really hits home, and that's with our children? Because I thought when you were mentioning extremism is in the eye of the beholder, yeah, you could be a parent showing up at a school board meeting in Loudoun County, Virginia. So can you talk to us about that grooming of our children to adopt the philosophical underpinnings of expecting to be spoon-fed from authorities what is and isn't the truth, rather than being able to reason, being able to understand classics and history and et cetera. What is going on with our children, and how is that affecting the next generation right now?
Yeah, so what's happening by and large in the public schools of the world, and this is partly under the leadership of UNESCO, is basically a global dumbing down of the population, a global reduction in critical thinking skills, and this is happening very much so in America. You know, the Common Core, which was adopted basically by all 50 states. A few states kind of pretended like they were going to resist, and then they adopted all the Common Core standards and textbooks anyways. They just put a new label on it. But the Common Core, they created a validation committee, handpicked experts that they thought would just rubber stamp these standards. And they had one English language expert on there, wonderful lady. I know her. I serve on some boards with her. Her name is Dr. Sandra Stotsky at University of Arkansas. And one of the things that she said really struck me. She said, this is going to reduce the critical thinking abilities of children. We're taking out all the great literature. We're taking out all of the critical thinking processes and critical analyzation of a text, and we're replacing it with like reading Obama's executive orders or reading EPA regulations on roof insulation. She said, this is ridiculous. So, first of all, kids aren't going to want to read that stuff. Second of all, it's going to reduce their ability to think critically. And I think that's exactly what's happening at the global level under the leadership of UNESCO. And as you read these documents about their war on conspiracy theories and how teachers and schools need to lead the way, it becomes very clear that they're not talking about teaching the children how to think. They're not talking about teaching them how to critically analyze information and critically understand, does this make sense? Does the evidence support it? Is this a logical argument? That's not what they're talking about at all. They're talking about spoon feeding these children a predetermined worldview, a predetermined understanding. And they actually give examples on issue after issue. Right? On the injections, for example, they have very clear guidelines. So if a child raises concerns about the safety or the efficacy of the injection, the teachers have a very clear script where it's outlined what they're supposed to say. They are 100% safe and effective. And, I don't know whether this was written before government agencies started finally acknowledging that wasn't the case or not, but that's what they're taught to say. You also have a line that was very, very troubling to me. It said that in certain cases, if the conspiracy theories involve hate or discrimination, and when you're talking about the UN context, that very much includes the traditional Christian, Islamic, Judaic, basically the traditional view of almost every major religion on the planet, that homosexuality is not something that should be encouraged. The Bible describes it as something that's sinful. So when you have a child espousing a quote-unquote conspiracy theory that involves discrimination, the teachers are actually encouraged to report those children to the authorities. Okay, this is a very, very dangerous trend. This is along the lines of what we saw in the Soviet Union, where if a child comes in and says, well, you know what, I don't like communism, I don't agree with the official ideology, my parents taught me something different at home, then that teacher is then instructed to consider reporting that child to the proper authorities for investigation. Obviously, this will be a record that follows them around for the rest of their lives. Extremely troubling. And imagine the chilling effect that will have on children, that will have on families. It very much reminds you, when you hear these stories of people who lived under communism, the parents had to go down in the basement at night and kind of tell their kids, like, hey, don't believe the stuff they're teaching you at school. Here's the truth. Freedom is actually good. I know your parents don't hate you. This is the kind of things that UNESCO is talking about. And honestly, this shouldn't be surprising. Right? UNESCO has been under the control of actual communists for a very long time. The current leader is actually from the Socialist Party. But before her, we had Irina Bokova. She was a member of the Communist Party of Bulgaria, actually a leading functionary in the communist regime there that slaughtered hundreds of thousands of people. When Ronald Reagan withdrew from UNESCO during his term, he actually said, look, this place is run by communists, by Marxists, by extremists, by fanatics who don't share our values of a free society. So that's why the Ronald Reagan administration pulled out. Then in 2018, the Trump administration pulled out and said the same thing. Hey, UNESCO is a fountain of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. It's hateful, it's extreme, it's highly politicized, they said, so we're not going to participate in this. And I'll give you one more example of goes a little bit beyond the school. But in these reports that UNESCO has produced for this war on conspiracy theories, they actually have a handy little guideline that they produced for citizens. And it encourages citizens, if you see a member of the media, a journalist, engaging in conspiracy theories, they actually encourage these people to report the journalist to their national press authorities or to their national media ombudsman, right? In America, we don't have that, although UNESCO actually some decades ago was trying to create a licensing scheme, a global licensing scheme for journalists. This is exactly why the U.S. government said, no, we're not going to participate, right? If you have the government deciding what can be said and what can be reported, you set up a very, very dangerous situation. And now UNESCO has resurrected this despite having been slapped down so many decades ago.
We've talked quite a bit now about some aspects of the problem. It sounds like it's pervasive and it's coming at us from many different directions and in different generations here. So let's start it maybe from the top down. What choices people can make to avail themselves of what's really going on as an adult, as a head of household, that sort of thing, trying to make good plans for your family to protect your family's future, and then also how to protect our children from the indoctrination.
Yeah, I would say it really begins with protecting our children, right? If we allow our children to be dumbed down and indoctrinated to the point where they're not able to critically analyze information, to the point where they don't have the factual context to be able to make sense of what's happening in the world, you've lost the battle already. You could then give the children all the good information in the world if they've already been conditioned to reject it, which is really what UNESCO is outlining here. All the good information in the world is not going to matter. And so I tell people it begins with your children. Make sure they're getting a good education. And unfortunately, in today's world, I don't believe that is even possible anymore in a public school. If you want your children to get a good education, it's either going to have to be homeschooling or it's going to have to be a thoroughly vetted, good private school. So I would begin with that. Parents, you have to protect your children. If you don't ensure that they get a good education, you can be sure the government's not going to make sure they get a good education. In fact, quite the opposite. Now, moving out to the adults, to people who are looking at this propaganda, to people who are looking at this censorship campaign and saying, I'm really troubled by that. Well, you really have to go out of your way today to find sources of reliable information. I would encourage people very strongly to take the time and the resources to make sure you have access to good information. The human mind is in some ways like a computer. Garbage in, garbage out. If you're getting inaccurate information, if you're getting misleading information, you're going to make bad plans and bad decisions based on that misleading or inaccurate information. And I mean, you could give a gazillion examples of this, but if you're told that something is dangerous and you make your plans accordingly and it turns out not to be dangerous, well, you just wasted a lot of your time. If you're told something is not dangerous, and in fact it turns out to be very dangerous, then you didn't incorporate that into your planning, and so now you're faced with a threat that you are not prepared for. So you've got to find accurate sources of information. There are some that I recommend very highly. In fact, almost all my clients, the publications that I write for them because they are high quality, they're rigorous, they're factual, they're very good. I would highly recommend your show, for example. It's a wonderful, wonderful program where people can get good information about what's happening on the economic front, what's happening in the markets, what's happening in the world. I would also recommend very highly the New American Magazine, where I serve as senior editor. And you don't have to use the internet. You can go to thenewamerican.com. Google has basically disappeared it from its search engine results. Now you have to look really, really hard to pull up an article from the New American. And it's just one example of what they're doing. But you can actually subscribe to the print magazine. It'll be delivered to your door twice a month. Another publication I recommend very highly is the Epoch Times. Fantastic newspaper, now one of the largest newspapers in America. In fact, right after the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and the New York Times is the Epoch Times, but you won't find it on Google, hardly, unless you really, really search. You will not find it on Facebook. You will not find it on Twitter. I just posted my article from there on Facebook today, and according to Facebook's own analytics, 0 people have seen that. Right? If I posted a CNN article, you could be sure many, many people would have seen that. So one of the things that you can do is make sure you're getting access to good printed material, right? The big tech companies cannot censor a physical newspaper that's coming to your doorstep once a week. So get access to good information, connect with people who are like-minded in your local community. It's so helpful to have like-minded people around you to bounce ideas off of, say, is this what you're seeing as well? And as a general rule at this point, I would say pretty much tune out what the mainstream media is saying, tune out what the government is telling you, because more often than not, it seems this is false, it's dishonest, it's misleading, it's propaganda, and people need to be very aware because the stakes are so high, especially if you have a family that you're looking out for.
I guess one thing that also came to mind as you were describing that is when you're trying to separate the wheat from the chaff in terms of this torrent of information and often misinformation that we're presented with, is it can be also a trustworthy guideline to talk to people who are actually at the coalface, people who are actually have their boots on the ground that are actually doing it. So in this case, there are physicians who are dealing with things and coming up with great successes. There are teachers who are who have results coming from their students who are able to demonstrate critical thinking, who are able to demonstrate a grasp of historical context and that sort of thing. So the more that you connect with and talk to people who are actually getting it done and delivering the results, and trust your gut along the way, you were given great powers of discernment and intuition by our Creator for your own good, and not to neglect those, not to just abdicate and just, it's so tempting to just turn over and go, well, I don't know, this stuff's just beyond me. This stuff is so complicated, so big. I guess I'm just going to have to just drift with whatever the authorities tell me because it's over my head, past my pay grade or whatever. It's like, no, the discernment of whether you're being buffaloed or not is something that's actually a pretty innate skill that people have if they just trust themselves. You also mentioned the upcoming Red Pill Expo. You want to tell us a little bit about that and what people can look forward to that?
Sure. It's going to be phenomenal. We've been doing about 2 every year for the last few years. This will be, I think, the 8th or the 9th that we're doing. It's going to be in Salt Lake City in November. Definitely hope to see people there. It will be, let me get you the exact dates. It'll be November 11th, 12th, and the 13th in Salt Lake City, Utah. As usual, there'll be some great speakers there talking about critical topics that people need to know about. I want to echo what you said about finding experts who really know their fields. Unfortunately, the big tech companies are making it more and more difficult to find them. One of the things that we were doing early on in 2020 was bringing on medical doctors, leading medical doctors and scientists to talk about these things. And unfortunately, they were all getting censored. We were getting shut down and removed and fact-checked and things. So it's becoming difficult. But if you do your due diligence, you can find the people who really are telling the truth, who are getting the results. And, one of the places that you can go to find these types of experts is the Red Pill Expo. And there are other great conferences like that where people who really are seeking the truth, people who really are seeing through the lies can congregate. And first of all, it's really energizing to be with people who have kind of broken free from the hold of misinformation from the official narratives and are really asking significant questions. It's really liberating, and it's also a great opportunity to connect with people who can point you in the right direction. I can't speak highly enough of events like this where like-minded people can come together. And I'll add another one too. Find some alternatives to the big tech companies. There are a lot of alternatives out there that are very good. I switch up my search engines. Believe it or not, Bing, I have found gets much better results when you're looking for good information. And I don't know how long that will last. Bing, of course, is owned by Microsoft. But if you compare the search results from Bing and Google, it's like night and day. You get much better search results from Bing. Keep in mind, obviously, that everything is tracked, monitored, compiled, and so you want to keep that in mind always. But another one I use is search.brave.com. Wonderful platform, and there are many other search engines that are good tools for seeking out information. And I don't tell people to just tune out completely all sources of information. I say gather as much as you can, even read the CNNs of the world, and then compare all the different narratives that you're getting and see what makes the most sense. As you said, trust your gut. Use some common sense, use critical thinking. As a Christian, I like to compare everything with how it lines up with the Bible. But, there are lots of different ways that we should have all learned in school for how we tell whether information is true, whether it's important, whether it's accurate. And you'll have a much easier time finding it if you use alternatives to the handful of mega corporations that now dominate the technology field.
One more chance, if you would, to tell people about Public School Exit and how they can avail themselves of the resources there.
Sure. So I serve as executive director of Public School Exit. It's a volunteer position. I don't make a dime, but it's a labor of love. And people can find us at publicschoolexit.com. We're working with churches and parents, not just all across the country, but all over the world. Our goal is to help you or your church or your family get the children out of the public school system as quickly and as safely and as efficiently as possible. So we've got resources for legal. One of our advisory board members used to be the superintendent of public instruction for Arizona, basically the Education Secretary for the state of Arizona. She's gone through the laws of every state, and she can walk you through, and we've got that posted on the website, walk you through what the laws in your state say. So if you pull your child out of school, do you have to send a letter to the school superintendent for your county? Do you have to pass a test? Do you just pull them out? Right? The laws in every state are different. So we've got legal help. We've got pastors from different denominations who can talk to your church. We've got wonderful attorneys who can look at things from a legal perspective. We've been vetting private Christian schools across the country. We can provide resources. We've vetted a lot of different homeschool curriculums. So many resources that are available. It's at publicschoolexit.com. And if you don't find what you're looking for, if you need an expert to actually come to your church or help your family with something specific, you can always reach out. We're very happy to make our incredible advisory board available to you, depending on what you need. We can help your church set up anything from Christian school from the ground up to a scholarship for homeschool students to some sort of hybrid to a homeschool co-op. We've got people who specialize in these things, and however we can help liberate as many children as possible from the public school system, we are ready and willing to help.
I wanted to mention, and I had mentioned to you just before we got started, that my wife and I finally signed up as full subscribers for the Epoch Times just this weekend and are now receiving all those articles gladly. And also, as homeschool parents of our 5 children who went all the way through up to where they were able to enter junior college while in high school, it was just heartwarming for us to associate with other like-minded homeschool families, because that was one of the concerns that people had about homeschooling was, we've been taught this, our children won't get socialized, they'll be oddballs, they won't be able to speak or to interact or form friendships or that sort of thing, they'll be awkward and that sort of thing. And what we found was it was just the opposite, that by interrelating with other homeschool children from families, they get out of this sort of this stilted grading of like, I can't talk to a 6th grader because I'm a 7th grader, so the 6th graders aren't cool anymore. It's not like that. And also they got to interact with children whose parents were deeply involved with them and who expected them to listen to their parents and that sort of thing, rather than being around young people who had basically been wedged away from their parents by the system and getting that influence. So it was actually quite challenging. We had to resist the urge to quote unquote keep up with the Joneses and the Smiths and the Petersons or whatever, because these people were doing Latin classes and those people were doing classics and those people were doing these things. So we had to kind of tone it down and go, okay, we'll do what we can. We'll participate in some of these enrichment group activities where we can. But we won't try to do everything. So rather than too few resources available, we found that there was a wide variety of resources once you start finding and connecting with other families that are also seeking to make sure that their children do get a solid foundation, a real understanding of the context of history and of our Constitution and of logic and of the classics and of, by golly, reading and writing and arithmetic and spelling and so on. So thanks for mentioning that there are many, many options for people other than just settling for the indoctrination camps that are being provided at our mandatory tax dollars. Well, Alex, we could go on. We're very grateful for your presence as always with us here. If people have one place that they reach out to find out your latest work, where should they go?
LibertySentinel.org has a lot of my stuff, but probably the best place is on social media. I'm on Gab, I'm on Getter, I'm on Truth Social, I'm on Twitter, and I'm on Facebook. So people can find me on any of those.
We've been speaking with Alex Newman. Grateful for your presence always here with us, Alex, on behalf of all of our viewers. Thanks for joining us on Liberty and Finance.
Thank you so much for having me, Dunnigan. Always a pleasure.
Miles Franklin Precious Metals is one of America's oldest and most trusted bullion dealers. Miles Franklin is A+ rated and accredited by the Better Business Bureau, licensed and bonded, and has 0 complaints ever registered. Here at Liberty and Finance, we are licensed brokers with Miles Franklin. To order, simply call us, discuss your needs, and we will let you know our live inventory, prices, and availability, and lock in your order over the phone. Once your order is locked, the price is held for you regardless of market fluctuations, and the metals are reserved for you awaiting your settled payment. Within 1 business day of ordering, you will receive an email invoice detailing the order and payment instructions. Miles Franklin accepts payments by bank wire, ACH or electronic check, money order, check mailed priority mail, and cryptocurrency. The fastest forms of payment are bank wire and cryptocurrency. Upon settled payment, metals will ship out within 3 to 5 business days. You will receive tracking information via email. Domestic shipping charges are $15 for any order under 500 ounces of silver or 10 ounces of gold. For orders larger than that, domestic shipping is free. The package will be double boxed, fully insured, and labeled discreetly, with no indication of the contents inside. For your privacy, the name Miles Franklin will not even be on the package. To talk to myself, Elijah, my brother Kaiser, or my father Dunnigan, call 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237.